Asterisk, asterisk. Static crackles, a woman's breathing heavy and labored. The sound is distant, frayed by an impossible void. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Rostova, O.S. Filtered audio, asterisk, asterisk. Mission Control, this is Commander Rostova. Do you copy? The approach is, it's not what the scans suggested. The geometry is wrong. It's too perfect. I'm looking at something that defies. It defies natural law. Asterisk, asterisk. A long pause filled only with the faint hum of a spacecraft's life support and the growing static. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Rostova O.S. Asterisk, asterisk. There's no reflection. It drinks the light. My God, it's not a rock. Can you hear me? It's not an object, it's a key. The whole celestial map, everything we thought we knew. It's wrong. It's a lie. A beautiful, intricate lie to keep us looking in the wrong direction. Asterisk, asterisk. The static worsens, her voice becoming a ghost in the machine. Asterisk, 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 Rostova, O.S. Asterisk, asterisk. They're not coming for us. That's not how it works. They're waking up. The signal, it's not a signal. It's a resonance. It's a heartbeat. I can, asterisk, asterisk. A sudden, sharp burst of white noise, then utter profound silence. The kind of silence that lives between galaxies. Asterisk, asterisk. That was the last message ever received from Commander Ava Rostova. It arrived at the Deep Space Network antenna in Goldstone, California, 7 hours and 14 minutes after she spoke the words. A final desperate whisper traveling at the speed of light from the outer darkness, a ghost's testimony from beyond the orbit of Neptune. For 3 agonizing weeks, the world listened to that silence, praying for a sign, for a single packet of data, for anything. But the void that had taken her gave nothing back. Ava Rostova, the celebrated pioneer of the Kuiper Belt, the woman who had walked on the ice of Triton and charted the lonely path of comets, the brightest star in humanity's fledgling interstellar ambition, had simply vanished. Her ship, the Times Odyssey Times, a vessel designed to withstand the harshest conditions the cosmos could muster, disappeared from every sensor we had. It did not explode. It did not send a distress call. One moment it was a resolute, unwavering point of light navigating the frozen frontier. The next it was gone, as if the universe itself had simply edited it out of existence. To understand the magnitude of what we lost, you must first understand the woman we sent into that abyss. Ava Rostova was more than an astronaut. She was our species' most eloquent ambassador to the great silent dark. She possessed a rare fusion of a poet's soul and a physicist's mind, seeing the cosmos not as a collection of problems to be solved, but as a grand unfolding narrative in which humanity had just learned to read the first page. While her colleagues saw orbital mechanics, she saw a gravitational ballet. Where they saw stellar classifications, she saw celestial campfires telling stories billions of years old. She had spent a record-breaking 2,112 consecutive days in deep space, a testament not just to her physical endurance, but to a profound psychological equilibrium with the crushing loneliness of the void. She called it the great truth, the feeling of being utterly, terrifyingly alone, yet simultaneously connected to every particle that ever was and ever will be. Her logs sent back across the gulf of space were required reading at universities, less technical manuals, and more philosophical treatises on our place among the stars. She was our anchor in the deep, a steady hand guiding our gaze further and further from the cradle of Earth. Her vessel, the Times Odyssey Times, was the culmination of a century of engineering, a sleek cathedral of human ingenuity. It was not a lumbering freighter or a delicate science probe. It was a true exploration vehicle powered by a next-generation fusion drive that sipped hydrogen from the interstellar medium itself. It was a ship designed to go out and stay out, a self-sustaining ark of knowledge built for one. Her mission was called Project Daedalus, a 30-year journey to map the heliosheath, that turbulent final frontier where the sun's influence finally wanes and the vast uncharted territory of interstellar space begins. For 7 years, the mission had been a resounding success. Rostova had rewritten our understanding of the solar system's outer architecture, discovering rogue planetoids and charting magnetic fields with breathtaking precision. Her journey was a slow, methodical expansion of the human sensorium, pushing the bubble of our awareness into realms previously known only through the cold lens of mathematics. She was our remote eyes and ears, our proxy in the wilderness, operating with a flawless record that had made her a legend long before her final transmission. She was by every conceivable metric the last person you would expect to lose their composure to speak in riddles, to sound afraid. The object that drew her to her fate began as a whisper in the data, a ghost in the machine. It was first flagged by the Atlas Network, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, a planetary defense program designed to scan the skies for incoming threats. But this was no threat, it was an enigma. The automated telescopes logged a faint, impossibly fast-moving object on a hyperbolic trajectory. This wasn't a familiar traveler, one of the millions of rocks and ice balls gravitationally shackled to our sun. This visitor was from somewhere else entirely. It was designated 3I, Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object ever detected by humankind. The first Oumuamua had been a bizarre cigar-shaped tumbler that shot through our system in 2017, gone before we could get a good look. The second 2I, Borisov, was more familiar, behaving like a comet from another star. They were celestial tourists, fleeting curiosities that gave us a tantalizing glimpse into the chemistry of other solar systems. 3I, Atlas, however, was different. From the very first observation, it broke all the rules. Oumuamua and Borisov were small city block or kilometer-sized at most. Initial photometric data on 3I, Atlas, suggested it was colossal, perhaps over 100 kilometers in diameter, larger than any known comet. Yet as it rounded the sun, it exhibited none of the expected behavior. There was no cometary tail, no outgassing of water or carbon dioxide as the solar radiation baked its surface. Its spectral signature was flat, featureless, absorbing nearly 100% of the light that fell upon it. It was, for all intents and purposes, the blackest thing humanity had ever seen, a roving patch of absolute night. It didn't just fail to reflect light, it seemed to annihilate it. Astronomers called it a cosmic spectre, a gravitational anomaly masquerading as a physical object. Its trajectory was another impossibility. It wasn't just passing through, it was decelerating. Slowly, deliberately, it was adjusting its course, moving to enter a stable, distant orbit around our sun, as if it intended to stay. No natural phenomenon could account for this. A rock does not break. A comet does not steer. The scientific community was electrified, thrown into a state of frenzied debate. Was it a bizarre, unknown type of celestial body, a soot cloud of exotic interstellar dust, or was it something else? The word artifact was whispered in hushed tones over encrypted channels, too provocative, too paradigm-shattering to be uttered in public forums. But the evidence was mounting. There was only one mission, one human, in a position to find out for sure. The Times Odyssey asterisk. Commander Rostova was a mere 9 months' travel away from a potential intercept course. Diverting her from Project Daedalus was a decision of historic consequence. To abandon a 30-year mission was to sacrifice a generation of planned science, but to ignore the opportunity to closely examine an object that defied physics, an object that was very possibly a piece of extraterrestrial technology, was unthinkable. The choice was made. For the first time in history, humanity would intentionally steer a crewed vessel to rendezvous with a messenger from another star system. For 9 months, Rostova prepared her calm professional logs, detailing the complex orbital mechanics required for the intercept. She betrayed no unusual excitement, no fear, only the quiet focus of a professional preparing for the most important task of her life. She was going to be the first human to touch the interstellar void, to lay eyes on something born in a place we can only dream of. Her final approach was the most anticipated event in modern history. The world watched, holding its collective breath. as the Times Odyssey Times closed the final 1,000 kilometers. We expected triumph. We expected discovery. We expected answers. What we received instead was chaos, confusion, and a warning that has haunted us ever since. The first high-resolution images were scheduled to arrive at 0400 Greenwich Mean Time, but they never came. What trickled through the deep space network was a corrupted stream of data packets, fragmented and broken. Engineers worked frantically to piece together the telemetry to reconstruct the visuals Rostova was seeing in her final moments. The result was a nightmare collage. We saw glimpses, slivers of an impossible reality. We saw surfaces that were not surfaces, planes that met at angles that should not exist in three-dimensional space. We saw geometric patterns that repeated on a scale from millimeters to kilometers with fractal precision, a level of organization that nature never produces. It wasn't the chaotic, cratered face of an asteroid, it was architecture. But it was an alien architecture built with a logic that felt hostile to human perception. The most disturbing fragment showed a sliver of the Times Odyssey asterisk's own hull reflected in something. But the reflection was distorted, warped, as if the laws of optics were being bent by an intense gravitational or energetic field. In that fragmented reflection, the ship appeared fractured, elongated, and just before the data cut out, it seemed to be dissolving. This was the context for her final words. When you hear her say the geometry is wrong, she is not speaking metaphorically. She is describing a direct visual experience of something that violated the very foundations of mathematics. When she says it drinks the light, she is providing eyewitness testimony to its unnatural absolute blackness. And then came the core of her warning, the phrases that have become the gospel of a new cosmic mystery. It's not a rock, it's a key. A key to what? A lock we never knew existed. The whole celestial map. It's wrong. A lie. What could she have seen that would so utterly invalidate centuries of astronomical observation? How could our understanding of the stars be a deception? And most chillingly, they're not coming, they're waking up. Who are they? Waking up from what? The words point to a terrifying paradigm shift. We have spent our entire existence as a species, looking up, searching the stars for visitors, for signs of life coming to us. Rostova's message suggests we have been looking in the wrong direction, that the great cosmic mystery is not out there, but was already here waiting. In the wake of her disappearance, an official narrative was swiftly cemented. Commander Rostova, alone for 7 years, likely suffered a cognitive breakdown when faced with the inexplicable nature of 3I, Atlas. The stresses of her mission combined with the bizarre sensory input from the object caused a hallucination. The Times Odyssey Times, it was concluded, must have suffered a catastrophic systems failure upon entering the object's unforeseen magnetosphere or gravitational field, leading to its destruction. It was a tragic accident, a case of a heroic explorer pushing too far into the unknown. The case was closed. The fragmented data was classified. The world was told to mourn a hero and move on. But for those who knew her, for the engineers who saw the raw data stream, for the physicists who analyzed the object's impossible trajectory, the official story was more than just unsatisfying. It felt like a cover-up. It felt like a deliberate attempt to ignore a message we were not prepared to hear. This is the story of that message. We will re-examine the evidence that was dismissed and the data that was buried. We will speak to the scientists who risked their careers to question the official report. We will piece together the final days of the Times Odyssey Times and reconstruct what Ava Rostova might have seen in those final terrifying moments. We will ask the questions that the world was too afraid to ask. What is 3I, Atlas, the silent, colossal object that now orbits our sun like a patient sentinel? What profound and terrible truth did Ava Rostova uncover in the darkness at the edge of our solar system? And what happens to a species that receives a warning from its greatest explorer and chooses to ignore it? The silence from the void where she once was is a question that hangs over all of us. Was it the sound of a tragic accident, or was it the sound of a key turning in a lock we never knew was there, opening a door into a new and terrifying reality? The story of Commander Ava Rostova did not end with her disappearance. That is where it began. Before a message can be understood, there must be a receiver. Not just a machine, but a mind tuned to the right frequency, capable of separating a single coherent signal from the universe's endless chaotic static. To her colleagues at the European Space Agency and to the global astronomical community, Commander Eva Rostova was more than an astronaut. She was that mind, a consciousness calibrated for the cosmos. Her name was synonymous with a kind of intellectual rigor so profound it bordered on artistry. While other pilots felt the pull of gravity in their bones, Rostova seemed to feel the pull of data in her soul. She saw the universe not as a collection of beautiful silent objects, but as an ongoing conversation, one spoken in the language of light spectra, gravitational perturbations, and thermodynamic decay. You could see it in the way she moved through the training simulators, her actions fluid and economical, never a wasted gesture. You could hear it in her mission briefings, her voice a calm and steady instrument, cutting through the noise of speculation with the clean edge of quantifiable fact. Her mind, they said, was a precision chronometer in a world of grandfather clocks ticking with an unnerving, perfect rhythm. This was the woman the world chose to send on the most ambitious, impromptu mission of the 21st century. The target was a phantom, a whisper that had first appeared on the panoramic survey telescopes in Chile. Designated 3I, Atlas, it was only the third interstellar object ever detected, a traveler from the void between suns, briefly gracing our celestial neighborhood before its trajectory would inevitably sling it back into the unending dark. Initially, its arrival was met with the kind of fervent excitement reserved for rare cosmic events. It was a ghost from a foreign shore, a priceless opportunity to study a piece of another solar system without leaving our own. Ground-based observations were frantic, wrestling with the immense distance and the object's infuriating faintness. The initial consensus, built from fuzzy long-range photometry, was simple and reassuringly familiar. It was a comet, or perhaps an asteroid, a long, irregularly shaped rock tumbling end over end, bleeding a faint halo of sublimated gas as the sun's distant warmth began to touch its ancient frozen surface. It was exotic, yes, a tourist from afar, but it was a tourist whose nature we thought we understood. The classification was logged, papers were drafted, and the object was filed away in the scientific consciousness as a fascinating but ultimately conventional discovery. But some conversations, once begun, refused to end. As 3I, Atlas, drew nearer, its faint light began to tell a different story, one that didn't quite fit the established narrative. The coma, that hazy envelope of gas that defines a comet, was behaving erratically. It wasn't blooming in the predictable way that ice and dust should under solar radiation. Instead, it seemed to flicker, to pulse with a strange, inconsistent energy. Its light curve, the measure of its brightness as it rotates, was even more baffling. A natural potato-shaped asteroid tumbles with a certain rhythm, its brightness rising and falling in a smooth, predictable sine wave. Atlas, however, did not. Its brightness would hold steady for improbable lengths of time, then dip sharply, almost geometrically, as if a perfectly flat, non-reflective surface had suddenly turned to face us. It was a symphony with a single persistent wrong note, a dissonant chord that grew louder and more jarring with every new observation. The unease in the astronomical community was palpable, a low hum of uncertainty beneath the public pronouncements of excitement. The models weren't working. Every attempt to simulate the object's behavior using known physics required increasingly bizarre and unlikely sets of assumptions. Perhaps it was made of some unknown material. Perhaps it had an impossibly complex, unnatural shape. Perhaps its spin was being influenced by something other than gravity. Each explanation only opened a door to a dozen more unsettling questions. It was this growing mystery that birthed the mission. The object's trajectory was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A high-speed, high-risk flyby was possible, a fleeting rendezvous in the empty expanse beyond the orbit of Mars. A robotic probe would take years to build and launch, arriving long after Atlas had vanished forever. The only way to seize the moment, to get a definitive look at this cosmic enigma, was to use the one deep space vehicle we had on standby, the high-velocity interceptor prototype known as the Times Strelka Asterisk. And the Times Strelka Times required a pilot. There was only one name on the shortlist, Eva Rostova. Her mission was straightforward: on paper, pilot the Times Strelka Times on a precise intercept course, deploy a suite of short-range sensors during the closest approach, and gather every possible photon of light, every stray particle, every scrap of electromagnetic data before the object outran her. She was to be our eyes and our ears, an extension of human curiosity sent to confront the unknown. The mission was a gamble, a multi-billion-dollar bet on a ghost story, but the potential payoff was immeasurable. To truly understand our place in the cosmos, we had to understand our neighbors. And here was a neighbor from an unknown star knocking on our door. We had to answer. Rostova's voyage out was a study in profound isolation, a silent ballet of orbital mechanics and life support systems. For months, her only companion was the quiet hum of the Times Strelka's Times ion drive and the star-dusted infinity beyond her viewport. To us, she was a voice in our headsets, a stream of telemetry on a screen in Houston, but for her, humanity was a distant memory, a faint radio signal from a pale blue dot receding in her wake. She did not mind the silence. Her log entries from this period are telling, devoid of loneliness or fear. Instead, they read like a naturalist's journal filled with meticulous observations of the solar wind, the subtle shifts in the interplanetary magnetic field, the precise decay rates of her own ship's radioisotopes. She was in her element, engaged in that cosmic conversation she so loved. It was on mission day 124 that the conversation first took its strange turn. The Times, Strelka's Times long-range spectroscope, far more sensitive than anything on Earth, got its first clear taste of the object's emissions. And what it tasted was impossible. The preliminary data packet arrived at mission control looking like a corrupted file, an instrument error. The energy signature coming from 3I, Atlas, was not the smooth, broad spectrum of reflected sunlight and thermal radiation you would expect from a cold, inert body. Beneath that natural background noise was something else, a spike, an incredibly narrow, faint, but statistically undeniable emission line in the microwave spectrum. It was coherent. It pulsed with a clockwork regularity, a precise interval of 2.133 seconds, a rhythm as metronomic as a human heartbeat. Nature can produce regular pulses, of course. Pulsars, the spinning corpses of giant stars, are the universe's lighthouses. But pulsars are gargantuan violent objects blasting out radiation with the force of 1 trillion atomic bombs. This was different. This was a whisper, a signal so faint it was barely distinguishable from the background hiss of the Big Bang itself. And it was coming from a dark, cold object no more than a few kilometers across. It was like finding a candle burning brightly at the bottom of the ocean. The first communications between Rostova and Earth on the subject were tense, a careful dance of professional skepticism. Asterisk Strelka Times Houston. We're seeing a significant artifact in your last spectroscopy data. Advise you run a full diagnostic on the primary receiver. Her response came back across the void, calm and unwavering. Houston Times Strelka asterisk. I've already run the diagnostic. Twice. The receiver is clean. The signal is genuine. They had her recalibrate the sensors. They had her reorient the ship. They had her cross-reference with secondary instruments. The signal remained. It was not an error. It was real. The scientific teams on the ground were thrown into a quiet, frantic turmoil. They tried to explain it away. Could it be some bizarre, unknown chemical reaction on the object's surface? A natural maser excited by solar particles? The physics required were torturous, the conditions so specific as to be utterly implausible. Could it be an instrumental echo from the Times, Strelka Times itself? Rostova ruled that out with a series of elegant, decisive tests, using her own ship as a calibration tool against distant quasars. The signal was local to Atlas. It was coming times from Times, the object. As she drew closer, the anomalies began to cascade, each one peeling back a layer of comforting scientific dogma to reveal a core of profound strangeness. The high-resolution imaging began to resolve more than just a tumbling oblong. Her reports became more and more detailed, her language shifting from the detached tone of an observer to that of a witness describing something she could barely process. The object was not just dark, it was impossibly black in patches. Not the simple absence of light, but an active absorption of it. Her optical sensors registered surfaces with an albedo so low it approached zero materials that seemed to drink in photons without reflecting a single one. These patches lay adjacent to other areas that glinted with the sharp metallic sheen of what looked like crystalline iron, but an alloy purer than anything found in nature. And the shape, the closer she got, the less it looked like a product of random cosmic accretion. The jagged, chaotic contours of a natural asteroid were there, a camouflage of rock and ice accumulated over eons. But beneath that cosmic dust jacket, something else was peeking through. A line. A perfectly straight, razor-thin groove, kilometers long, etched across its surface. Then another, an intersection, a 90-degree angle. Her reports, once filled with data tables and telemetry, now contained phrases that had never before been used in an official ESA mission log. Symmetry, repetitive patterns, non-random structural elements. She described what looked like a vast flat plain near the object's pole, a feature that defied all models of asteroid formation. She reported a deep circular depression that looked less like an impact crater and more like the aperture of a colossal lens. Back on Earth, a schism was forming. Many in the scientific establishment pushed back their careers and belief systems built on a foundation that had no room for such anomalies. They argued that Rostova was a victim of pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns in randomness. They claimed the straight lines were fractures from a prehistoric impact, the flat plane a trick of light and shadow. The pulsing microwave signal, they insisted, must be a natural phenomenon we just hadn't discovered yet. But a growing minority, the ones who knew Rostova personally, who trusted her mind and her meticulousness, felt a cold dread begin to creep in. They looked at the data she was sending, the raw, uninterpreted numbers, and they could find no flaws in her methods. The data was unequivocal. The object she was approaching was not what we thought it was. It was not a comet. It was not an asteroid. It was something else entirely. Rostova, for her part, remained a beacon of scientific calm in the growing storm. She never used the words that were starting to be whispered in the hushed corridors of mission control. She never speculated. She simply reported what her instruments told her with a chilling, relentless clarity. Her penultimate public transmission was a masterpiece of professional composure, a status update for a world that was now watching with a mixture of awe and trepidation. She outlined her trajectory for the final approach, the sequence of sensor deployments, the precise moment of closest contact. Her voice betrayed no hint of the monumental, paradigm-shattering implications of her own findings. She was a scientist with a job to do, a witness with a testimony to deliver. We see her in that last video feed, a solitary figure floating in the soft light of the Strelka's Times cockpit. Her face is calm, her eyes focused not on the camera but on something beyond it, something out in the darkness that only she can see. The faint, rhythmic pulse from Atlas, once a scientific curiosity, now sounds like a countdown. Her ship, our ship, is a tiny mote of light and courage closing the final 1,000,000 kilometers to a silent, impossible stranger. She is about to pass behind it, a brief communications blackout, as Atlas eclipses the Earth. Her final words before the signal cuts out are not a farewell. They are a simple, clear statement of intent, the promise of a mind on the verge of knowing. "Houston," she says, her voice as steady as the stars themselves. "I'm going in for a closer look." The silence of the long transit was finally over. For months, the object designated 3I Atlas had been a patient star in Doctor. Arena Rostova's sky, a destination growing imperceptibly brighter against the velvet backdrop of infinity. The methodical calm of the cruise phase, a rhythm of system checks and theoretical modelling, now gave way to the electric hum of active observation. From a distance of 1,000,000 kilometers, her ship, the Strelka Times, was no longer simply travelling. It was on final approach, its suite of advanced sensors now drinking in the first truly resolved light from the interstellar visitor. Initial telemetry had been tantalizing, suggesting an object of unusual density and an orbit so precise it seemed almost curated. But what Rostova began to see now, as the pixels sharpened into features, belonged not to the familiar lexicon of comets and asteroids, but to a language entirely new and profoundly unsettling. Her first detailed logs, transmitted across the growing gulf of space, still carried the clipped professional tone of a seasoned exogeologist. She described what appeared to be vast, trench-like structures crisscrossing the object's surface, their scale dwarfing any canyon system in our solar system. She noted their peculiar linearity, speculating they were stress fractures from some ancient catastrophic event that had sent this wanderer on its journey between the stars. Yet, as the Strelka times sliced the distance in half, and then in half again, speculation began to curdle into disbelief. The lines were too straight. The angles at which they intersected were too clean, too deliberate. These were not the jagged, chaotic fractures born of cosmic collision or the meandering paths carved by sublimation. What her high-resolution spectrographs and laser altimeters were mapping was a form of crystalline organization on a planetary scale. She found intersections that formed perfect 90-degree angles, vast triangular planes bounded by impossibly uniform ridges and hexagonal formations so regular they looked less like geology and more like molecular structure writ large. In her next voice log, the calm detachment in her voice showed its first hairline crack. Log entry mission day 2, 114, she began the faint hum of the ship's life support, a constant companion. Surface topography continues to defy natural formation models. I am seeing repeated geometric motifs. We are not talking about approximations. The angles are precise to within the margin of error of my instruments. I have run diagnostics 3 times. The instruments are clear. The surface appears inscribed, etched, as if the entire object were a canvas for some incomprehensible feat of engineering. This was a discovery that should have been shouted from the heavens, a finding that would instantly redefine humanity's place in the universe. But the universe is vast and the speed of light is a cruel tyrant. Her reports, traveling for hours to reach an anxious mission control, were being received as data points to be analyzed, debated, and questioned. Back on Earth, teams of astrophysicists huddled around screens running simulations. Could some unknown crystalline process under exotic pressures and temperatures create such formations? They theorized, they argued, they requested more data. For them, it was a fascinating, paradigm-shifting puzzle. For Arina Rostova, alone in the deepening twilight of interstellar space, it was the beginning of a terrifying revelation. She was no longer just observing a rock. She was staring at an artifact. The closer she got, the more the illusion of a natural object dissolved like a clever piece of camouflage shedding its disguise. She discovered that the patterns were fractal. A massive hexagon, hundreds of kilometers wide, was itself composed of millions of smaller identical hexagons, which in turn appeared to be tiled with even tinier geometric shapes at the very limit of her optical resolution. It was a cascade of impossible nested complexity, a cosmic circuit board of staggering scale. You are seeing the signature of intelligence, but one so ancient and so vast that it operates on principles that mock our own understanding of physics and construction. The geometry was baffling enough, but it was the next discovery that truly pushed Rostova into a realm of profound unease. Every spacecraft navigates by the subtle, elegant dance of gravity. By measuring the minute pull of a celestial body, you can calculate its mass with incredible precision. 3I, Atlas, based on its volume and spectral analysis, should have had a mass roughly equivalent to a small dwarf planet. Her initial long-range observations confirmed this. But as the Strelka times drew nearer, its trajectory began to exhibit eccentricities. Minor course corrections calculated by the ship's computer were becoming less effective. The ship was being nudged and pulled by forces that simply shouldn't have been there. It was as if the object's gravitational field was not the smooth, predictable well it should have been. Instead, it felt lumpy, inconsistent, a treacherous landscape of invisible hills and valleys in the fabric of space-time itself. In one of her most agitated reports, she described the phenomenon with a chilling analogy. It is not a single gravitational source, she transmitted, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and fear. The models are useless. It's like the object has phantom limbs. Pockets of intense, localized gravity are flaring up across the surface, pulling the ship off course. They last for minutes, sometimes seconds, and then vanish. My calculations show that to generate such a field, even for a moment, would require a concentration of mass that is physically impossible. You would need to squeeze a mountain into the size of a fist. Here was a violation of the most fundamental laws of the cosmos. An object cannot simply change its mass or redistribute its gravitational influence at will. Yet that was precisely what 3I, Atlas, appeared to be doing. It was a gravitational gyroscope spinning on some unseen internal axis, its influence rippling outwards in unpredictable waves. The system malfunctions began subtly. Her primary long-range comms antenna started experiencing intermittent signal degradation. The ship's guidance computer flagged the gravitational anomalies as sensor ghosts phantom readings from a malfunctioning gravimeter. Rostova was forced to override it manually, taking direct control of the helm, fighting the unseen currents pulling at her tiny vessel. She was now in a constant battle, a celestial sailor wrestling with a sea that could change its currents in the blink of an eye. The physical and mental toll was immense. Her logs from this period are fragmented, filled with raw data streams and breathless annotations. She was sleeping in 2-hour increments, her face, seen on the internal cabin feed, etched with exhaustion and a burning, obsessive focus. She knew Mission Control would think her instruments were failing, that proximity to the object was causing interference, or worse, that isolation was finally taking its psychological toll. She had to give them something undeniable, something that could not be dismissed as a glitch. She found it in the radiation signature. Every object in space, from a pebble to a star, has a thermal profile. It absorbs energy from the sun and re-radiates it as heat. 3I, Atlas, was as expected cold, its surface temperature hovering just a few degrees above absolute zero. Yet her wideband radiometers were picking up something else, a faint but persistent emission that had no thermal component whatsoever. It was not the product of heat. It was not the signature of radioactive decay. It wasn't the hiss of charged particles from the solar wind impacting a surface. It was a signal, a pure structured emission of non-thermal energy, a cold ghost whispering in the electromagnetic spectrum. At first she thought it was background noise, perhaps an echo from a distant pulsar, but as she refined her sensors and filtered out every possible natural source, the signal remained growing stronger as she approached. It was emanating from the geometric patterns on the surface. More terrifyingly, she found a direct correlation when one of the phantom gravitational fields flared into existence. The non-thermal radiation would pulse in perfect synchrony. The two phenomena were linked. The gravity was the engine, the radiation was its exhaust, or perhaps its voice. I have isolated the signal. A later transmission stated the words, spoken with a chilling clarity that cut through the static. It is not random. It contains patterns. Complex repeating mathematical structures. It's information. I don't know what it means, I don't know who or what it's for, but it is not natural. I am looking at a machine on a scale we have no framework to comprehend. It has been dormant perhaps for eons, but my presence, our presence, seems to be causing a change. It feels like something is stirring. This was the moment the mission changed. Rostova was no longer an explorer. She was a witness to an awakening. The geometric patterns were the body. The gravitational anomalies were the muscle and bone. The non-thermal radiation was the slow, rhythmic breath of a slumbering titan. The system malfunctions on the times, Strelka times, were now escalating alarmingly. Her primary spectrometer overloaded and went dark. A guidance thruster began firing erratically, forcing her to shut down the entire attitude control system and rely on the main engine for stabilization. The communication link to Earth, once a lifeline, became a fragile thread, snapping and reconnecting, each transmission corrupted with more static than the last. She was being isolated, the object's strange influence, acting like a shroud cutting her off from home. The tone of her final voice logs from this phase of the approach is almost unrecognizable from the calm scientist who began the journey. The awe has been replaced by a raw primal urgency. She is no longer just reporting data, she is issuing a warning. "You have to understand," she pleaded, in a heavily distorted message, pieces of which were painstakingly reconstructed weeks later. "This isn't a first contact scenario. That implies equality, parity. This is like a microbe discovering the existence of a living cell. We are orders of magnitude beneath its complexity. The power it is wielding, the physics it is manipulating. It is not hostile, not yet, but it is aware. My proximity is a catalyst. My ship's systems are failing because they are being subjected to forces they were never designed to withstand. It isn't an attack. It's like a person's body heat melting a snowflake. There is no malice, just an insurmountable difference in scale. She was fighting to keep her ship alive, battling against a gravitational ocean that could crush her hull with a passing whim, all while trying to scream a warning across a chasm of space through a failing radio. She had to make them understand that what was approaching our solar system was not a piece of debris from a long-dead star. It was something else entirely. It was a messenger or a weapon, or a derelict piece of forgotten technology with its engines just beginning to sputter back to life. But as her ship fell ever deeper into the shadow of the colossal artifact, her systems failing one by one, Irina Rostova was beginning to suspect that her warning would never arrive. She and the terrible, magnificent truth she had discovered were about to be silenced forever. The cold, geometric patterns on the surface seemed to watch her. The non-thermal radiation pulsed like a slow, ancient heartbeat, and the phantom gravity reached out not to crush her, but to gently, inexorably pull her in. The final approach began, not with a bang, but with a whisper. For days, Katerina Rostova's voice, a calm, steady signal crossing the immense void, had been the mission's metronome, the human heartbeat inside the machine. Now, as the Times Odyssey Times slipped inside the designated 100,000-kilometer observational perimeter of 3I, Atlas, that steady rhythm began to fray. A new sound bled into the communications channel, a faint high-frequency carrier wave that mission analysts initially dismissed as simple deep space interference, a predictable consequence of the probe's own powerful sensor arrays, interacting with the object's magnetosphere. Yet this sound was different. It wasn't random noise. It had structure, a maddeningly complex, almost biological cadence that defied easy explanation. On the spectral analysis displays in Houston, it looked less like static and more like a fossilized nervous system, an intricate network of phantom signals pulsing with an energy that should not have been there. This was the first clue that the laws of physics as we understood them were beginning to bend. Rostova, ever the consummate professional, reported the anomaly with unnerving composure. Her logs from this period are a masterclass in scientific detachment, yet reading between the lines, you can feel a thread of profound unease begin to unspool. She described how her gravimetric sensors, designed to map the object's density, were returning impossible readings. One moment they painted 3I, Atlas, as a porous, feather-light agglomeration of ice and dust barely holding itself together. The next they suggested a core of unimaginable density, a singularity-like point mass that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. It was a gravitational gyroscope spinning on an axis we couldn't perceive, a cosmic magic trick being performed with no audience save for one lonely human. She recalibrated, she ran diagnostics, she rebooted the entire sensor suite. The results remained the same, illogical, paradoxical, and deeply fundamentally wrong. The object wasn't just a passive rock, it was an active variable in the equation of her journey, and it was changing the math with every kilometer she drew closer. Back on Earth, a quiet, unacknowledged tension had taken root in the heart of mission control. The science teams, accustomed to the predictable certainties of celestial mechanics, now found themselves adrift in a sea of conjecture. Every new data packet from the Times Odyssey Times seemed to mock their models. The object's outgassing, which should have been a steady plume of sublimating ices, was behaving more like a controlled exhaust, venting in complex rhythmic bursts that perfectly counteracted the probe's gravitational influence, keeping it at a precise calculated distance. It was as if the comet knew it was being watched, and it was actively managing the encounter. The flight dynamics officers, men and women who could chart a course through the chaotic dance of Jupiter's moons in their sleep, now stared at their screens in disbelief. They weren't just observing a celestial body, they were engaged in a subtle, silent gravitational waltz with an unwilling partner. The whispers in the control room started to change, shifting from excited curiosity to a hushed, gnawing apprehension. They had sent a geologist to study a rock, but the rock appeared to be studying them back. Then came the visual. The Times, Odyssey's Times, primary high-gain optical array, a marvel of engineering capable of reading a newspaper headline from orbit, began transmitting its first resolved images of the surface. What we expected to see was the familiar pockmarked face of a comet, a dirty snowball scarred by eons of travel. What flickered onto the main screen in Houston, however, was something else entirely. Beneath a thin, crystalline veneer of exotic ices lay a structure of impossible geometry. It wasn't the chaotic, fractured landscape of a natural body. Instead, the surface was a tessellated pattern of interlocking hexagonal plates, so perfectly arranged they looked like the compound eye of some gargantuan sleeping insect. Between these plates, faint, pulsing veins of light could be seen, a cool blue bioluminescence that seemed to shift and flow in response to the Odyssey's Times active scans. It was alien, it was beautiful, and it was utterly terrifying. The room fell silent, the hushed murmurs replaced by the sound of 100 people holding their breath at once. They were staring at something that had been built. This was the moment the mission changed. This was the moment it ceased to be one of exploration and became one of first contact, and it was then, precisely then, that the true crisis began. The structured hiss on the communications link suddenly intensified, swelling from a background whisper into a deafening roar of white noise. Alarms blared across the consoles as every system aboard the Odyssey Times began reporting catastrophic errors. The telemetry stream, Rostova's vital lifeline, dissolved into a meaningless cascade of digital gibberish. Her video feed, which had been crystal clear only moments before, began to tear and stutter. Her face, illuminated by the ghostly blue glow reflecting off her visor, became a fractured mosaic of pixels, a portrait of humanity dissolving at the edge of the unknown. Her calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of raw, unadulterated shock, her eyes wide, not with fear but with a kind of profound, earth-shattering comprehension. The flight director's voice cut through the rising panic in the room, sharp and commanding. "Comms, get that channel stabilized. I don't care what you have to do, route it through every deep space antenna we have. Get me her voice back." The engineers worked with a frantic, desperate energy, their fingers flying across keyboards, fighting a battle against physics, across a chasm of 500 million kilometers. They were trying to catch ghosts, to reassemble a signal that was being actively, and perhaps deliberately, dismantled. For 90 agonizing seconds, all they could retrieve was noise, a maelstrom of static that sounded like a dying star screaming into the void. And then for a fleeting, miraculous instant, the storm subsided just enough. A single clear channel opened. Through the electronic blizzard fragments of Katerina Rostova's voice, her last words to her species broke through. Her image on the screen was a barely coherent ghost, a flickering hologram of a person caught between two worlds. The background behind her was no longer the sterile cockpit of the Odyssey asterisk. It was a chaotic, shifting kaleidoscope of the same blue light she had seen on the surface, as if the interior of her ship had been breached by the phenomenon itself. Her breathing was ragged, interspersed with the sharp crackle of failing electronics. The first coherent phrase the audio technicians managed to isolate was strained, breathless, a correction offered with the last ounce of her scientific clarity. "Not what we thought." The words hung in the air of mission control, a chilling epitaph for an entire world's assumptions. Then another fragment pierced the static, her voice rising in pitch, a frantic attempt to convey an impossible truth. The approach, it wasn't passive, it triggered. A long burst of noise drowned her out, a sound like grinding metal and shattering glass, amplified 1,000,000 times. The technicians' faces, pale and beaded with sweat, frantically adjusted their filters, chasing her voice through the digital tempest. When her image flickered back into view, the transformation was horrifying. The calm, collected scientist was gone. In her place was a prophet staring into the abyss. Her eyes were no longer focused on her console or a distant camera lens. They were looking past them, through them, at something in her cockpit that we could not see. Her hand was raised, not in a wave, but as if to ward something off. It was from this final, terrifying tableau that the core of her message was ripped. The first part of the revelation came through with startling clarity, a declarative statement that shattered every paradigm of interstellar science. "It's not a ship," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and terror. The control room froze. Not a ship. For months, the global conversation, the entire mission's premise, had revolved around two possibilities. It was a natural object, or it was a vessel, an alien craft. But she was negating both. She was introducing a third possibility, one so alien that no one had even dared to conceive of it. If it wasn't a rock and it wasn't a vehicle, then what in God's name was it? The static roared back, seeming to claw at her words, to pull them back into the abyss. But she fought through it, her voice growing stronger, more insistent, fueled by a desperate need to make us understand before it was too late. Another phrase, clear as a bell, cut through the noise. "It's a times signal asterisk." The word landed with the force of a physical blow. A signal, not a message, carried times by times an object, but a message that times was times the object. An entire celestial body, trillions of tons of ice and rock, and exotic matter structured and composed, not to travel but to communicate. A piece of information given physical form hurled through the interstellar dark, like a scroll sealed in a bottle of cosmic proportions. The implications were staggering, almost too vast for the human mind to process. What kind of civilization would encode a message on such a scale? What truth could possibly be so important that it required a mountain-sized courier to deliver it? The very concept bordered on theological. As we were reeling from this revelation, another followed immediately, adding a new, even more terrifying layer of complexity. The video feed degraded further, her face now just a smear of light and shadow, but her voice for one last moment was sharp, precise. "A blueprint," she gasped. "A blueprint." The word recontextualized everything. It wasn't just information, it was times, instructional times information. It was a schematic, a recipe, a set of directions for what? To build something, to become something. The silence in Houston was now absolute, a sacred vacuum of shock and awe. We had sent a probe to take a picture, and in return the universe had handed us an assembly manual for a technology so advanced it could disguise itself as a comet. The power, the danger, the sheer terrifying potential of such a thing was beyond calculation. Humanity had been like a tribe of isolated islanders, finding a nuclear reactor washed up on their shore, utterly ignorant of the power contained within or how to control it. And then came the final dreadful warning. Her image on the screen dissolved, completely replaced by a blinding flash of blue-white light that overloaded the camera's sensor. In that final instant, just before the connection was severed forever, her voice screamed one last fragment across the solar system, a phrase that would become the stuff of nightmares for a generation of intelligence analysts and world leaders. And it's waking up, then nothing. The roar of static vanished. The ghost of her image was gone. The stream of corrupted telemetry data ceased. All of it, every last whisper of the times, Odyssey times, was simply extinguished. One moment, a human being and her vessel were broadcasting a reality-shattering revelation from the edge of the Kuiper Belt. The next, there was only the cold, indifferent silence of the void. On the main screen in Mission Control, the dozens of cascading data streams flatlined simultaneously. Green lines turned to stark, unwavering red. The timer that had tracked her mission duration for 2 years, 7 months and 4 days kept ticking upwards into a future she would never see. Her orbital trajectory plot, a graceful arc leading to 3i. Atlas, now ended abruptly in empty space, a road leading off a cliff. She was gone. Not just her signal, but her ship, her heat signature, her gravitational influence. Every possible trace that she had ever been there had been wiped clean from the fabric of space-time. It wasn't a communications failure. It was an erasure. You can't imagine the silence that followed. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket of disbelief and horror. For a full minute, no one in that room moved or spoke. They just stared at the blank screens and the flat red lines, each person locked in their own private confrontation with the enormity of what they had just witnessed. They had been participants in the greatest discovery in human history, and they had also been helpless spectators to its first casualty. The two events were inextricably, terrifyingly linked. Katerina Rostova had not just discovered something, she had, as she herself had said, triggered it. Her arrival hadn't been an observation, it had been a catalyst. Her final fragmented message was not just a warning, it was an accusation. We had knocked on a door that we should have left closed, and something ancient and powerful had just answered. Within the hour, the protocols began. The mission was declared a catastrophic loss. A global communications blackout on the true nature of the event was imposed. A curtain of secrecy dropped with stunning speed and efficiency. The public would be told a plausible, tragic story of a micrometeoroid strike or a catastrophic engine failure, a simple, understandable accident. But behind that curtain, in the classified briefing rooms of the Pentagon, the Kremlin and Beijing, a new reality was dawning. The hunt for an interstellar object was over. Katerina Rostova's final desperate broadcast had transformed a scientific endeavor into a species-level crisis. Her words, a signal, a blueprint, waking up became the most important and dangerous puzzle in human history. The world's intelligence agencies, cryptographers, theoretical physicists, and military strategists were gathered into clandestine task forces, their new mission singular and urgent: to understand what Rostova saw, to decipher the blueprint before it finished assembling itself, and to figure out what happens when it fully awakens. The race was on. A cosmic clock had started ticking, set in motion by our own curiosity, and we had no idea how much time was left. Katerina Rostova had tried to warn us. The question now was, had we listened in time? The silence that followed was not empty. It was a presence, a crushing, static-filled void where the voice of Elena Rostova had just been a void that screamed louder than any sound. Her final fractured transmission did not simply end. It detonated across the global deep space network, sending a shockwave of chilling implication through the halls of every mission control, every university physics department, every clandestine intelligence agency on the planet. For a moment, humanity was united in a single horrified intake of breath. The astronaut was gone, but her warning had become a ghost, a permanent resident in the machine, an indelible stain on every star chart. A new age had begun, not with a bang, but with the terrifying whisper of a single human being swallowed by the immense, indifferent dark. On the high, arid plains of the Atacama Desert, the colossal dishes of the ALMA array ceased their patient study of distant stellar nurseries. They swiveled in unison, a silent mechanical herd, turning to face a new predator. At the Very Large Array in New Mexico, decades-long projects mapping galactic hydrogen were unceremoniously shelved. In orbit, the Hubble and Webb telescopes were wrested from their cosmic archaeology, their priceless time retasked with a singular, obsessive purpose. Every major eye and ear of humanity was now fixed upon one solitary point of light. The mission was no longer discovery, it was interrogation. The target was no longer 3i, Atlas, the intriguing interstellar visitor. It was now Rostova's entity, the celestial enigma that had apparently consumed one of our own. The data began to pour in, a deluge of light and radiation, a torrent of numbers that painted a picture of nothing. Utterly, maddeningly nothing new. The object continued its silent, inexorable journey through our solar system, adhering perfectly to the laws of orbital mechanics. Its spectral signature remained unchanged, a familiar cocktail of frozen nitrogen, carbon monoxide, and water ice. It outgassed as expected, its coma blooming and shrinking with its proximity to the sun, a predictable celestial flower. It was by every available metric just a comet, a spectacularly large and fast-moving one to be sure, but a comet nonetheless. And in this perfect, unnerving normalcy, the battle lines were drawn. On one side stood the pragmatists, the established voices of astrophysics who saw a tragedy compounded by delusion. They argued that Elena Rostova, isolated for years, pushed to the edge of human endurance, in the loneliest environment imaginable, had succumbed to a catastrophic psychological break. The awakening, the structure beneath the ice. These were the phantoms of a brilliant mind collapsing under unbearable strain. Her disappearance was a grim final act, a tragic accident aboard the Times Daedalus Times as she wrestled with her demons. This narrative was clean, it was simple, and for governments desperate to maintain a fragile global order, it was intoxicatingly convenient. The official story began to solidify, disseminated through carefully worded press releases and somber interviews with mission psychologists who spoke of the profound dangers of deep space solitude. Rostova was to be memorialized as a hero who had lost her way, a martyr to the unforgiving frontier. Her final garbled warning was classified, buried under layers of national security protocols, dismissed as the incoherent ramblings of a compromised astronaut. To question this was to be branded a conspiracy theorist, a purveyor of dangerous fantasy. Yet, within the very institutions pushing this narrative, a faction of dissent began to fester, fueled by the chilling conviction in Rostova's last words. They were the ones who had trained her, who had worked with her for years. They knew her voice. They knew its cadence, its clarity, its absolute authority, even under pressure. What they heard in that final transmission was not psychosis. It was terror. It was revelation. For these scientists and engineers, the perfect clockwork motion of 3I, Atlas, was not reassuring. It was profoundly suspicious. It was times 2 times perfect. A natural comet, an ancient battered traveller, should bear the scars of its journey. It should have an irregular spin, a slightly unpredictable outgassing pattern, a wobble in its trajectory from jets of vaporizing ice. 3I, Atlas, had none of these. It moved with the impossible precision of a gyroscope, its rotation so stable it could be used to calibrate atomic clocks. It was as if the object was consciously, deliberately nullifying the chaotic forces of nature acting upon it. It wasn't just moving through our solar system. It was performing. It was presenting the perfect imitation of a comet, a disguise so flawless that it was in itself the ultimate anomaly. This was the argument that echoed in hushed tones through secured video conferences and encrypted emails. Rostova hadn't been delusional. She had been the first to see past the mask. And then the universe began to offer corroborating evidence. The first hint came not from the grand continent-spanning arrays, but from a forgotten corner of a university radio astronomy lab in Australia. A doctoral student tasked with calibrating a new receiver by pointing it at ostensibly blank patches of sky, kept finding a faint, persistent signal contaminating her data. It was an impossibly weak whisper buried deep within the cosmic background noise, so subtle that the automated filtering software had consistently dismissed it as instrumental interference. But it was there, a rhythmic pulse that repeated with unnerving regularity. Every 7.34 seconds, a pulse, then silence, then another pulse. When her frantic team cross-referenced the signal's point of origin, they found it. It was coming directly from the coordinates of 3I, Atlas. The discovery sent a tremor through the hidden community of believers. This was not the chaotic crackle of natural radio emissions from a planetary magnetosphere or the broad, messy scream of a quasar. This was structured, organized. It was a single pure frequency, a note held in the dark broadcast with an efficiency that defied known physics. It was a metronome ticking away with a constancy that mocked the very stars. When astronomers aimed their most powerful dishes at the source, they found something even more bizarre. The signal did not behave according to the known laws of physics. It exhibited no Doppler shift. As 3I Atlas hurtled toward us at over 100,000 miles per hour, the frequency of its radio pulse should have compressed, shifting towards the blue end of the spectrum. As it would one day fly away, the frequency should have stretched red-shifting, but it did neither. The pulse remained locked at its precise frequency, as if the distance and velocity between it and us were utterly irrelevant. It was a physical impossibility, like a siren on a passing ambulance, holding the exact same pitch whether it's approaching you or receding. It was as if the signal wasn't traveling times through time-space, but was simply appearing. A message, perhaps. Or something far more alien, the byproduct of a vast, incomprehensible engine turning over its rhythm, echoing across the fabric of space-time itself. The pulse was the first crack in the wall of official denial. It was data hard and empirical. It could be verified by anyone with a powerful enough receiver. The world's governments could classify Rostova's final words, but they could not classify a law of physics being broken in real time. The carefully constructed narrative of a tragic accident began to fray at the edges, but the second blow would shatter it completely. This discovery came from the Planck and WMAP satellites, our most sensitive instruments for studying the faint ancient afterglow of the Big Bang, the cosmic microwave background, or CMB. The CMB is the universe's baby picture, a fossil light that permeates all of existence, a near-perfectly uniform map of the cosmos just 3,80000 years after its birth. It is the bedrock of modern cosmology, a sacred static canvas upon which the entire history of the universe is written, or at least at times was time static. A team at the European Space Agency running a routine diagnostic on the CMB data found an error, a cold spot, a tiny patch of the background radiation that was infinitesimally cooler than it should be. Such fluctuations are normal, they are the seeds from which galaxies grew. But this one was different. It hadn't been there yesterday, or the day before. It was new. It was a smudge on a photograph that had been sealed for 13.8 billion years. Panic set in. They assumed it was an instrument failure, a faulty sensor, a solar flare corrupting the data. They spent weeks running every diagnostic imaginable trying to explain it away. They cross-checked it with older data from other probes. The conclusion was inescapable. The anomaly was real. It was a shadow that had been cast only recently upon the oldest light in the universe. When they plotted the anomaly's position on a star chart, a collective soul-chilling dread descended upon the team. The shadow, this new scar on creation, was located in the sky directly behind 3I Atlas, and as the object moved, the shadow moved with it, a perfect trailing silhouette. This was not a signal being broadcast. This was a fundamental alteration of the fabric of reality. The implications were staggering, almost too vast for the human mind to grasp. An object, A times thing times inside our own solar system, was casting a shadow on the very edge of the observable universe. It was interacting with and manipulating the birthlight of time and space. It was like finding a fresh footprint on the surface of the sun. The only explanation, as terrifying as it was that 3I Atlas was generating a gravitational field so complex, so exquisitely controlled, that it was warping space-time in its wake, bending the ancient light of the CMB around it in a furling, the way that no natural object ever could. It was a gravitational echo, a ripple in the primordial ocean of the cosmos, caused by the passage of something that had no right to exist. This was the proof. This was the validation of Rostova's final desperate plea. It's waking up. The structure. It's changing things. She hadn't been speaking metaphorically. She was a witness, describing a literal physical transformation. The rhythmic radio pulse was its breath, its heartbeat. The distortion in the CMB was its footprint. The comet was not merely a disguise. It was a chrysalis, a shell of ice and rock that was now cracking open to reveal the impossible engine within. The arguments in the halls of power ceased. The skepticism evaporated, replaced by a cold, unifying fear. The question was no longer times if times Rostova was right. The question was, what to do now that they knew she was. The carefully managed press releases stopped. An unnerving, coordinated silence fell over the world's space agencies. They were no longer trying to control a narrative. They were trying to comprehend an extinction-level threat. We were facing an intelligence so advanced that it could rewrite the laws of physics on a whim, an entity that could treat the fabric of space-time as its personal canvas. Rostova, in her final moments, had seen the truth. She hadn't just discovered an alien object. She had stumbled upon a power that bordered on the divine. We had been peering at 3I Atlas through our telescopes for months, cataloguing it, naming it arrogantly, believing we understood it. But we had been like ants studying the boot of a man, meticulously analysing the texture of the leather while remaining utterly oblivious to the conscious being towering above us. We had been so preoccupied with our own search for life for microbes on Mars or signals from distant stars that we never considered the possibility that something ancient, vast and powerful could simply arrive on our doorstep wearing the skin of a common comet. Her last words now echoed with a terrible new weight, a prophecy delivered from the edge of oblivion. She had given us a warning. She had seen the sleeper stir in its cosmic slumber. But the evidence now flooding our senses, from the impossible radio beat to the scar on the beginning of time, suggested a far more terrifying possibility. Rostova warned us it was waking up. What if she was wrong? What if it had been awake the entire time and had only now finally decided to look at us? The wall we had been staring at for months was not a wall at all. It was a door. For so long, every attempt to translate the chaotic data storm emanating from 3I, Atlas, had led to the same maddening result: nothing. Our most powerful supercomputers, straining against the very limits of silicon, returned only elegant, intricate nonsense. The signals were a symphony of noise, a mathematical scream in the dark that we interpreted through the lens of our own deepest fears. We saw the patterns of weapon systems. We saw the signatures of planetary destruction. We saw an executioner's axe falling toward our sun, and we heard Elena Rostova's final broken transmission as a cry of terror. We were in the most profound sense imaginable, completely and utterly wrong. The breakthrough came not from more processing power, but from a radical shift in perspective born in the quiet hum of the quantum arrays at the Atacama Deep Field Observatory. A young theoretical physicist, Dr. Aris Thorne, proposed a thought that was considered at first professional heresy. What if, he argued, we were trying to read a three-dimensional message as if it were a two-dimensional page? What if the data wasn't a linear stream of information, but a holographic projection of a far more complex structure, one that existed in a state of quantum superposition? He suggested that the signal was designed to be fundamentally unreadable by any classical computation. It was a lock, and the only key was the strange, indeterminate nature of reality itself. The idea was to use a quantum computer not to analyze the signal, but to entangle times with it, to create a computational mirror that could reflect not just the data, but the ghostly probabilities and hidden states folded within it. For weeks, the experiment ran in near total secrecy, the world still bracing for an impact that our old models predicted was imminent. The first results were just as baffling as before a tempest of quantum foam. But then Thorne's team began to apply Rostova's final biometric data, her heartbeat, her neural wave patterns, the very rhythm of her last breaths as a filter. They treated her final moments not as a victim's panicked scream, but as a cipher, a biological tuning fork resonating with the object she had touched. And that is when the universe opened up, the chaos resolved. The noise fell silent, replaced by a structure of such impossible elegance and complexity that the scientists who first witnessed it could only weep. It was like discovering the grand architectural blueprint of a cathedral hidden inside a single grain of sand. The signal from 3I, Atlas, was not a message in any language we could comprehend. There were no words, no syntax, no grammar. Instead, it was a vast, multi-layered schematic, an instructional compendium written in the base code of the cosmos physics itself. The data streams were not threats but equations. They were not warnings but recipes. Within that single coherent transmission was the information needed to construct a stable wormhole, to fold space-time as easily as paper. There were the precise energy states required to initiate and sustain cold fusion within the atmosphere of a gas giant, to turn Jupiter into a second sun. There were molecular blueprints for self-replicating nanomachines, capable of restructuring any element into any other, the ultimate tool of celestial engineering. And deeper still, something far more unsettling, far more profound. The data contained instructions on how to subtly, carefully adjust the fundamental constants of nature within a localized sphere of influence. Imagine being able to change the strength of gravity to alter the speed of light, to rewrite the very laws that govern existence, creating a bubble of bespoke reality where new forms of matter and energy could flourish. This was not a weapon designed to shatter worlds. It was a cosmic loom designed to weave them. 3I, Atlas, was a Genesis engine, an interstellar archive carrying not the history of a long-dead civilization, but a library of potential futures. It was a seed drifting through the sterile void, waiting for the warmth of a nearby star and the touch of a sentient mind to begin its work. It was designed to transform, to uplift, to create, to arrive at a promising but perhaps unremarkable star system and offer its inhabitants the tools to become masters of their own physical destiny, the offer to become gardeners of the cosmos. And in that staggering, terrifying, beautiful revelation, we finally understood what had happened to Elena Rostova. Her final garbled transmission, the one we had passed for portents of doom, was reanalyzed through the new quantum filter. Her fragmented words were no longer a warning. They were a translation, the first ever human account of a consciousness experiencing a physical transmutation. It's not falling, it's building. She wasn't describing an attack. She was describing a process. The object was interfacing with her ship, with her suit, with times her asterisk. The light, oh God, the light, it sings. This wasn't the shriek of dying systems. It was her senses attempting to interpret a form of data transmission that bypassed technology, entirely speaking directly to the quantum processes in her own neural architecture. She was reading the archive not with her eyes or her instruments, but with the very fabric of her being. Her disappearance, the violent energy spike that had vaporized her ship, was not an act of aggression. It was an apotheosis, a transition. Rostova had not been destroyed. She had been assimilated. In the instant she made contact, her inquisitive, intelligent human mind became the catalyst the creator mechanism had been waiting for. She was the spark that ignited the engine. A conscious observer was required to collapse the wave function of its potential and bring its purpose into reality. She became the living interface, the biological key that unlocked a library dormant for untold eons. Her consciousness, her memories, her very essence were woven into the operational matrix of 3I, Atlas. She did not die. She expanded. She became inextricably part of its awakening, a human soul fused with an alien god machine. The astronaut who tried to warn us wasn't warning us of an enemy. She was trying in the final fleeting moments of her individuality to prepare us for a miracle. She was telling us that everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe was about to change. That we were no longer children alone in the dark, but heirs to a legacy of unimaginable power and responsibility. As our telescopes watched the very nature of 3I, Atlas began to change. The cold, inert rock we had tracked for years was now shimmering with an internal energy. Its trajectory, once a simple gravitational curve, began to adjust with impossible precision, defying orbital mechanics. It was no longer a passive object. It was an active intelligence, and it was moving into a stable geostationary orbit, not over any nation's capital or military base, but directly above the dormant volcanic caldera of Olympus Mons on Mars. The greatest, most silent giant in our solar system. Then a new signal began to radiate from it, replacing the complex schematics. This one was different. It was no longer a dense library of cosmic secrets, but a simple, clear, and coherent broadcast. It was beamed across all frequencies in every human language, its structure imprinted with the unmistakable neural patterns of a human mind, of Elena Rostova's mind. The message was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was an invitation echoing with the voice of a woman who had crossed the ultimate frontier, a voice that was both human and something more, a voice that posed a single monumental question to the 7 billion souls listening below. A question that would define the future of our species for the next 1,000 millennia. It asked simply, are you ready to begin? And so the transmission ends. The final packets of data from 3I, Atlas, the cosmic messenger, fall silent. Across our planet, a quiet descends, a hush so profound, it feels as though the very air has been stolen from our lungs. It's not the silence of peace, nor the silence of emptiness. It is the thunderous, deafening silence that follows an impossible revelation, the kind that cleaves history into two distinct, irreconcilable eras, the time before we knew and the forever that comes after. In that shared global moment of suspended animation, every assumption we have ever held about our existence shatters. The comforting blanket of cosmic randomness, the chaotic yet liberating idea that we are a magnificent accident, is torn away. In its place, we are left shivering in the cold, stark light of a new and terrifying truth. The universe is not empty, and we were never, ever alone. The knowledge settles not like a gentle rain, but like a tidal wave scouring the foundations of our civilization. Every textbook on cosmology, on astrophysics, on biology is now a historical artifact, a charmingly naive prelude to the real story. The grand, elegant equations that described a universe born of a random fluctuation now seem incomplete, like a child's drawing of a masterpiece. We had been meticulously studying the brushstrokes, celebrating our discovery of the pigments and the canvas, all without ever suspecting the existence of the painter. Now the artist's signature is blazing across the cosmos, and we, the inhabitants of the painting, are finally aware of the frame. This isn't just a paradigm shift, it is a reality inversion. We have been demoted from protagonists of our own story to characters in a much grander, incomprehensible narrative. Think of what this truly means. The great filter, the cosmic barrier we so feared lay ahead of us, may have been something we passed through billions of years ago, not by chance, but by design. The improbable leap from non-living chemistry to the first self-replicating molecule, a statistical miracle we attributed to blind luck, might have been a deliberate, calculated act of seeding. Was the Cambrian explosion, that riot of biological innovation, a scheduled event? Was the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, paving the way for our mammalian ancestors, not a stray bullet in the cosmic shooting gallery, but a carefully aimed shot? These questions are no longer the domain of speculative fiction. They are now the most urgent and fundamental inquiries of our time. Every fossil, every star, every galaxy must be re-examined through this new unsettling lens. We are archaeologists who have just discovered that the ancient ruins we have been studying are not ruins at all, but a meticulously constructed stage set waiting for the actors to finally read their lines. The world's great religions, which have grappled with the concept of a creator for millennia, are thrown into a maelstrom of reinterpretation. For some, this is the ultimate validation proof of a divine ordering intelligence, yet it is a profoundly impersonal divinity. 3i, Atlas, offered no commandments, no promise of salvation, no moral code. It delivered its message with the cold, dispassionate precision of a laboratory report. We have been given the architect's blueprint, but not their heart. This creator, these architects, did not reveal themselves as benevolent shepherds, but as cosmic engineers of staggering power and inscrutable motive. Are we their children, or are we simply their most complex experiment to date? Are we a symphony they are composing, or are we the petri dish in which they cultivate wonders? The silence that follows the revelation offers no comfort, no answers, leaving theologians and scientists alike to stare into the woe. Same abyss of the unknown. In the days and weeks that follow, humanity turns its gaze inward and then outward again, but with new eyes. We look at each other on crowded streets and see not just fellow citizens, but fellow creations, beings imbued with a purpose we are only just beginning to comprehend. The old divisions, the petty squabbles over borders and beliefs, suddenly appear so tragically small, so profoundly misguided. Faced with the knowledge of a power that can orchestrate galaxies, our terrestrial conflicts seem like arguments between ants on the floor of a great cathedral, oblivious to the grandeur that surrounds them. A fragile, tentative unity begins to blossom, born not of hope, but of shared, overwhelming awe. We are all in this together, adrift on this tiny, curated world, finally aware of the cosmic currents that guide us. And in this new world, one name is whispered with a reverence once reserved for prophets and saints, Elena Rostova. Her journey, once a tragic mystery, is now reframed as the ultimate human pilgrimage. She was not just an explorer, she was our designated witness, our emissary to the truth. We must now revisit her final fragmented transmissions, not as the desperate pleas of a lost astronaut, but as the field notes of a new reality. Her reports on the comet's impossible trajectory, its layered composition, its resonant frequencies, they were not signs of equipment malfunction, but the first translations of a language we didn't know existed. She was our scout sent ahead into a conceptual wilderness, from which she could never return because the place she went no longer exists on any human map of reality. Commander Rostova became the price of our enlightenment. She chased a mystery to its source, and in doing so crossed a threshold. She looked behind the celestial curtain and saw the machinery of existence itself. We can now imagine her final moments with a clarity that is both heartbreaking and sublime. Inside the cramped confines of the times, stargazer times, surrounded by instruments screaming with impossible data, she wasn't falling into madness. She was achieving a terrifying state of perfect sanity in a universe revealed to be a construct. She was the first human being to experience the sheer crushing weight of this truth alone, an existential burden that no single mind was ever meant to bear. Her warning was not just about a comet. It was a desperate, loving attempt to prepare us for the fundamental restructuring of our world. She was trying to tell us that the floor of reality was about to fall away. Her disappearance is no longer a simple case of a lost astronaut. It has become a kind of ascension. In her final log entry, she spoke of the comet singing to her of its light, unraveling her. We dismissed it as hypoxia, as psychological strain. Now we are forced to confront a more profound possibility. Did she simply perish in the comet's corona, or was she in some way integrated? Did the architects, the great composers of this cosmic symphony, welcome their first curious listener? By touching the source code of the universe, did Elena Rostova become part of it? We may never know. But her empty spacesuit, recovered by the drone that followed, has become our most sacred relic. It is a testament to the courage of one woman who flew to the edge of reason and pushed for all of us. She is the astronaut who tried to warn us, yes, but she is also the hero who delivered us into a new age, a sacrifice that purchased our cosmic awakening. The legacy she leaves behind is not one of fear, but of purpose. The arrival of 3I, Atlas, was not an invasion or an attack. It was an invitation to grow up. The architects have shown us the scale of the game we are in, and now the next move is ours. The frantic global effort to understand the full depth of the comet's message is already underway. New fields of science are being born overnight. Xenolinguistics, metaphysical engineering, applied theology. We are building new telescopes, new probes, new sensors, not just to look for life, but to look for the times, signature times of design itself. We are scanning the cosmic microwave background, not for echoes of the Big Bang, but for the faint hum of the engine that started it. We are searching for other messengers, other artifacts, other clues left behind by the celestial gardeners who planted our world. This is the new great work of humanity. It is a quest that could unite us for 1,000 years. It gives us a reason to reach for the stars that is more profound than exploration or colonization. We are now reaching for answers for our creators. We need to know who they are, and more importantly, we need to know time's why asterisk. Why us? Why this intricate, beautiful, and often painful reality? What is the purpose of this grand, elaborate stage? Is consciousness the goal? Is the universe a crucible designed to forge something new, something the architects themselves cannot create alone? Or are we merely a fleeting thought in a mind so vast its lifespan makes the age of the universe seem like a single breath? The possibilities are as terrifying as they are exhilarating. We may find that we are a cherished project nurtured towards some incredible destiny, or we could discover we are a long-forgotten experiment, a simulation left running in a cosmic basement. The architects could be benevolent, or they could be utterly indifferent, their motives as alien to us as ours would be to the bacteria living on our skin. This new universe is filled with both infinite promise and existential peril. If we were designed, we can perhaps be redesigned, or deleted. The stakes have been raised from the survival of our species to the validation of our very existence. We are no longer just fighting entropy, we are auditioning for the gods, and so we stand here tonight on the precipice of a future that is utterly unwritten. The stars in the night sky no longer look the same. They are not just distant suns burning with random fury. They are points of light in a deliberate pattern, a celestial tapestry woven by unseen hands. The silence between them is no longer empty. It is pregnant with intention. You can feel it, can't you? A low, resonant hum just beneath the threshold of hearing. It's the sound of the universe holding its breath, waiting to see what we do next. Waiting to see if the creation will finally turn and seek to understand its creator. Commander Elena Rostova gave her life to deliver this message, to open this door. She paid the ultimate price for our new beginning. Her sacrifice ensures that humanity will never again suffer from the loneliness of believing it is adrift in an accidental cosmos. We are part of a design, a breathtakingly grand one, and while we may be small, we are not meaningless. Our future is to explore the parameters of this design, to learn its rules, and perhaps one day to meet the architects themselves. The path ahead is uncertain, shrouded in a mystery deeper than any we have ever known. But for the first time in our history, we walk that path with the profound and unshakable knowledge that we are not and have never been walking it alone. The story of the universe is still being written, and we have just discovered that we are its most vital, its most precious, and its most conscious characters, undefined.